this is good because it's moving us toward thinking about like what the role of the beloved is, right? Rather than just the lover. What is the role of the person who is, receiving the love, whether wanted or unwanted? And then, but I do think we need to come, because we are running out of time, to this question that Carson is getting to, which is if desire is, desire as possession or oneness is dangerous to us, um, because of this kind of power imbalance and because of many other things we've been talking about, then and then also like there's danger to individualism too, right? Like those things seem to be at odds. If it's dangerous to be an individual and dangerous to want wholeness with another person, then like where do you go from there? I mean, that's where she's going in these pages that we read, and kind of toward the next part. So maybe we can start with like what Carson's talking about as a sort of solution, and then we can kind of discuss whether or not we see that as kind of viable, or how it's viable or how not viable. So if we go back to the pages here, so the chat's going to disappear again. Okay. Where she's going. So you can see actually, if we go back to page 55, and you'll see where she's talking about the dissolution of boundaries here. Breath. And breath maybe is something we can think about too, right? Breath as a thing that doesn't have kind of boundaries, and what the Greeks think of as consciousness. And like if you think Eros usually has like the wings, just like Hermes or whatever. There's a few of them with wings, maybe, or just those two. But she's going toward. Let's just go back to page 62. So this is where the book starts to shift. What does the lover want from love? And here's one possible solution she comes to. On the surface, the lover wants a beloved, but obviously not, right? Like that's the symbol standing in for some other thing. If we look carefully at the lover in the midst of desire, for example, Sappho in fragment 31, we see how severe an experience it is for her. How severe an experience for her is confrontation with the beloved, even at a distance. And if we think back to that poem, which was in the Ruse chapter, right? The speaker is enacting like three different positions: one of beloved, one of the watcher, the thing in between, and one of the lover, one of the beloved, and one of the thing in between. And it's through watching somebody else watch the beloved, it's through that thing between, that the lover is able to kind of realize just how much they love the beloved. And that's that ruse, that triangular thing is going to be the key here to what she thinks could be a possible solution. When she's saying, what, maybe we should start by just by like trying to clarify what she means by the ruse then. What does she mean by the ruse? She's going toward novels, as we recall. And so novels are an example of the ruse. And so maybe if we can kind of connect it to the concreteness of what a novel does, then we can figure out what she means by the ruse. So what is it that she says a novel is or does?
Well, I think that she really says the novel is like on page 81. She talks. Where is it? She talks about how the writer knows their story has to end and they want it to end, and the reader knows it wants to end. So basically, the novel. I don't know what I was going with that sentence, so I'm gonna stop talking about that. But she she wants to build the connection between reader and writer. She wants there to be a sense of desire between those two, as well as the desire between the reader and the characters. So a novel is to build that desire, that connection, that relationship between all three.
Okay, so one triangle is between reader, novel, and characters, or something like that. Reader, characters, and what's in there? The
Writer.
desired writer. Okay, and then what is it that the writer does? Because this is maybe the most useful section in the book for those of you who want to write. Um, she's going to try to kind of she's putting forth as a theory of how to write a novel, which she goes on to do actually really successfully after this book, though she writes it because she's Anne Carson in poetry. Um, but it's it's basically a novel. Some of you have read that with me before, sections of that.
This is when she starts talking about like paradoxes.
Yeah, Zeno's paradoxes.
Yeah, the novelist knows that the story must end and they want it to end, but also they're doing what they can to not get to that ending, sort of. Like, yeah, you want to get to the end. Exactly. You want to get to the end, but you want it to be worth reading, and so you need that conflict in there, like Belle said.
So,
And
Kenny,
so
you
like,
were asking what are Zeno's paradoxes, right?
I did ask that, and then I realized I could have looked it up, and then I forgot to.
Oh, that's okay. So one of the most famous ones is if you imagine like trying to run from one place to another, you have to run first half of the way, right? So you run half the way, and then you have to run half the way between there and the end too. So you run half of that way, and then you have to run half of the way to there to the end too. But if you keep running half the way, which you have to do in order to get to the finish line, you will actually never get to the finish line. Right. So if it's true that you have to run half the way to get to the finish line, you can actually never get to the finish line. That's the paradox.
So the ruses that she talks about are kind of like not unnecessary problems, but like problems you don't generally realize are there, I guess, or problems that get there when you overthink. Like, because in novels, a lot of the conflict that they encounter can be like relatable, but it's not usually something you would go through word for word in your lifetime. So the ruses could be like the problems or the turtle and the arrow paradox, though.
They're basically the same. They're like things about how if like Achilles tries to overtake the turtle, it has to go a certain way for like it's constantly never catching up. The solution is calculus. uh, Maybe, I don't know enough about calculus to say whether that's the solution or not. But what is the solution? Like, how do you square that with? Obviously, you can run from here to the finish line. What Zeno is saying is absolutely true, right? It's if you keep running half the way, you'll never get there. I mean, I guess I won't leave you guys in suspense. People have tried to figure this out for a long, long time. Um, you don't only run halfway. That's exactly right, right? That's the solution. The solution is you have to be able to hold in your head both the fun of the paradox, which is its own kind of truth, but is a truth that encapsulates desire, right? Because if you keep desiring something, then you'll never get it, right? But when you get it, you can't desire it anymore. And also the truth of reality, which is that you can run from here to a place, right? And the only way to have the fun of that is to be able to hold both of those things in your head at the same time. Like if you take only Zeno's paradox as truth, then you become extremely frustrated and you like hate Zeno, right? And if you only take reality as the truth and you're like, no, that's just not true, then you have no fun with the paradox at all. Like it's not fun to you. It's just like a totally dismissible thing. You're probably also not that fun of a person. The if you have to be able to take both of them at the same time, and that's what she's talking about as a ruse. The ruse is to take both the paradox and the actuality and keep those, and the distance between them, all three of those things at once. And that's her solution to how to be both like an individual without the dangers of individuality and want wholeness without the dangers of wanting wholeness. You have to be able to keep those two things, which seem like a paradox, right, in your head at the same time with the distance between them. So the Zeno can kind of stand in for that. The other way of thinking about with the poem that she was talking about, the Sappho poem, right? Like she wanted to say in that all three of those points are not like real things. They're in the poet's head, right? They're an invention of the poet. And so in order to kind of love appropriately or healthfully, you need to be able to create those 3 points imaginatively, right? You need to not relevant. Yes, yeah. There are a bunch of paradoxes. If you love somebody, one of the dangers of it is that you kind of invent the beloved in your head. You can't know everything about that person, and so you often like create a kind of ideal version of them. Especially if you're like really in love with them, you think they're like wonderful in all of these various ways, even though like of course they have their faults. If you only kind of think of it that way, you're actually erasing the other person. You're erasing the other from existence completely. You're not acknowledging that they're a human with their own ideals and desires and stuff. But it's impossible to totally embrace somebody as themselves and still have the reach of love. You have to create the image. So in order to kind of avoid wanting to possess the other, or to take over the other, or to like create an image of the other rather than the person themselves, Carson's going to say you need to have the paradox in your head all times, right? You need to both accept that you have created an idealized version of somebody and also remember that they are a real person who contradicts your idealized version of them, and kind of embrace the reach between them, right? Embrace the spinning top. Don't try to stop it in either direction, because then what you've got is possession or no love. So language, interestingly, is one way she thinks you can do it, right? She says you've got to just, she wants to reckon with the idea that she feels most alive when, this is the other time when she says this is why she's writing the book, basically. One is because consonants are amazing. True. Two is because why does she feel so alive when she's like falling in love and reading a book? Why are those the two times when she feels most alive? The love triangle. Yeah, I don't think she actually means like you want to create a love triangle with somebody else, like a real other person there. It's just to kind of be in those 3 positions at once rather than trying to occupy one or the other.
Yeah, I keep thinking about Sappho's poem where it's her beloved, and then a man. Like that's such the epitome of the modern love triangle with the 3 people. And so the fact that we went from that, which was like, oh, this is Sappho, she's the greatest poet in the world, look at what she's doing, to, I mean, it's so Twilight of you though. Like it's an interesting cultural shift. That's just what I would start thinking about.
Yes, yeah, good. The love triangle is imaginary, right? And that goes back to what we were talking about in the first week, with Lacan, who says, right, you have this, the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. So you have to be able to hold the imaginary and the real, which you can't access, right? You can't access a real person who's separate from you in the symbolic. And so that's what she means by language. That's why she goes to language. You have to, the only way you can hold it is through the symbolic, through a kind of story you tell yourself, through, you know, like art, through reading a book, through writing a book, um, through talking about things. The symbolic is so important, in the ways that you kind of are able to occupy the symbolic are very important. And there's like this, I mean, whether or not you buy this, this is going to make it much easier for her to say, like, well, okay, everything's in the symbolic, so there is a healthy way and an unhealthy way to kind of use or access the symbolic. And we can talk about that, right? We can talk about that. And in doing that, we can kind of create a sort of like a ruse-like solution to the problem at hand without actually solving the problem at hand. We can like talk about it in relation to a solution without actually solving it, because you can't solve it.
Yeah, and like those devices, like the symbolism and the ruses and everything, they come across best in like words, especially written language, because you can go back over them again and again. And so that may be where we get to where Anne Carson talks about like loving language and everything, is because it's hard to say these things in anything, like it's hard to represent these things in any way besides words, because art is almost like painting and such is almost too subjective, whereas writing, there's wiggle room in there, you know, especially when you're writing in a like for a culture that you're a part of, because everyone has certain cultural associations.
Yeah, good. So it's good to bring back culture, because right, culture is still there, and it's still like a huge danger to corrupt our like our ability to kind of hold these in the symbolic, because the symbolic of culture is a corrupted symbolic. So let's go. The last place she's going to go in this section is to Bellerophon, which is a weird story, right? It's like, it's kind of like this guy who just like blindly goes through life, and it's totally okay, even though like there's plenty of places where he clearly could have gone terribly wrong without even knowing it. It's just like managing it. What is she saying here? Like, don't even worry about it. Just be beautiful.
It feels like something that it feels like it feels like she's commentating on Bellerophon as a commentary on the privacy of writing as like becoming more private than language has become before. But then it feels like she's like, her commentary is like, yeah, they didn't really use this much. So I don't know what she's actually trying to say.
Is she saying like we should be like Bellerophon? She doesn't seem to be saying that so much, right? So what is she saying about Bellerophon as like a model for desire?
I mean, it kind of here. I mean, it kind of goes to that like there's no way to win, because he either opens the tablet before leaving, or like before getting there and realizes what's going on and has that moment of pain, or he waits until he gets there, has the king open it, and then from there realizes that things have gone bad and now he has to do all this stuff. And so it's almost like, you know, the only way to avoid that pain would be to avoid the situation entirely, but what kind of life is that? So there's no winning in desire, I guess, kind of.
I mean, Carson also mentions that kind of the traditional endings of Bellerophon acts as almost not quite a prototype, but maybe an archetype, wherein it is, she says, It is a love story where Eros acts from a folded text. Its erotic situation includes two terms until the lover deliberately complicates these by adding a third angle, which talks kind of a little bit about like mirroring the love triangle. And then it also talks about how like each of these elements in some ways obscures other questions that you might have, in the same way that loving someone blindly might obscure qualities about them that you find questionable.
Okay, that's
Wow,
interesting.
What?
I was just circling the area where Ellie was reading for, and I drew the worst circle of my life, so I'm gonna delete that.
What Kina was saying too, though, about you said something like that's no way to live a life. I think that's important, right? The way that Bellerophon goes through life blithely is a pretty like desireless life, actually. Like he doesn't actually access any of the desire that's happening around him. He just kind of like is beautiful and ignorant, and like that works out okay for him. But maybe that wouldn't work out okay for people with less like of the privilege of beauty or whatever that he has. So if she's going to say what he could do to save his life, right? It's open the letter. Where is this? The meaning is a blind point. Okay, now my lines are actually going through the words, but we should focus on this part where it says, if Bellerophon were to unfold the tablet and intercept the message he is carrying, right? If he were to open it up and see the agony of desire here, the agony that he's caused by being desirable or whatever, without knowing it, right? It's not his fault. But anyway, he would find wrenching pain. He would find that he had hurt somebody so badly that they wanted to kill him, even without knowing it.
Yeah,
And that would save his life.
yeah, it's almost like he's like, this is a story where it's from the point of view of the beloved rather than the like pursuant, which is interesting, because that would imply that like her message for this chapter would be, don't be the beloved, be the lover or the pursuant. Like the best place for you is to be pursuing someone else rather than being pursued, in a way, because being pursued leads you to a no-win situation, because you have these two things going against each other for your sake, whether it's two people or a person and some unseen force or whatever. And you're just sitting there happy as could be in the middle of it, but either way you end up feeling pain because of the pain you caused someone else, or because of the pain inflicted on you.
But the lover ends up the most miserable, though, right? Like she's got her heart broken. She doesn't even get revenge for like her own fantasy. She doesn't even get revenge for it. Bellerophon's the only one who comes out unscathed. I think we should think about this, though. Like, why would coming out unscathed be worse for Bellerophon than learning that desire can be dangerous to him, right? Why is it worse for him for somebody else to save his life, or for like his life to just be saved, than for him to save his own life, even if it causes pain? So let's carry that question into the rest of the book. So read the rest of the book for next week. If we could, I was going to try to leave time today, but obviously we went up to time. But try to get those videos in on Friday night so that I can put it up a little earlier. Though part of it is my fault for waiting. So yeah, I'll try to get up on Saturday if you guys can try to get them to me by Friday. Okay, so that's it. Thanks.